Hey guys, Matthew here. So this is going to be the final installment of the top X ways to make currency series. In this one, we're going to go over trading in the first, 4-ish days of a league. This is not going to be like the other one where I say this can be extended to like the first week of a league, because honestly, what I'm about to say really only applies for the most part to like the first 4 days. Afterwards, it's kind of like if there's a meta shift. There is a reason for that, and as you know, awful as it seems, the reality is that around day 4 is when currency becomes available for most players. Not only because a lot of people are starting to reach maps and starting to chain maps, but also because bots are in full speed and are capable of offering currency, so people can actually just RMT. And unfortunately, that means there's simply a lot more currency available in the game. Fortunately, though, that also means that the meta in terms of crafting or in terms of trading changes a lot. So this, like I said, this is going to cover more like the first like 4-ish days of a league, where it is pretty much different than say day 6 of a league or day 9 of a league. That's a completely different ball game. This I really want to talk about trading and flipping and whatnot in the first like 4 days. So to put it really bluntly and very simple, when it comes to trading in the first 4 days of a league, just don't do it. Just stay away from trading altogether. Stay away from buying items unless you know that it's a very safe bet. Unless you have either the knowledge because of say patch notes or previous leagues, or you just have a lot of currency so you can afford to sit on currency. I would personally advise against it. And what I'm saying when I'm talking about trading, I'm talking about the bigger trading things. Like for example, buying stuff for an exalt that might be worth like 2 exalts in a few days. Things like that might seem like good ideas, but are typically very risky. Or for example, rare items. You might be looking at like rare rings, for example, with life and resistances and stuff like that, and be like, okay, so I'm just gonna do some flipping of those kind of items. I'll buy them for like extremely cheap and try to sell them for a little bit more expensive. But the reality and from experience, the problem is that you'll end up sitting on almost all of those rings, for example, because they're so mediocre. Then after the first couple days, nobody needs them anymore. Nobody's gonna want a ring with like 70 resistance and 55 life after 4 days into a league, unless they're getting into a league super late or they're making a new character and stuff like that. But when that point comes around, there is such an abundance of supply for mediocre rings and stuff like that. And I'm just saying rings, but it applies to almost everything else, essentially, that you're just going to sit on them forever and end up vendoring them. So that's kind of like the short answer, is essentially stay away from trading and flipping and all that for the first few days of a league until markets start to really stabilize, right? If you see any, going up and down and irregularities in markets, just stay away from it. It's not safe. And the reason I'm saying this is simply because currency is worth a lot early, in a sense that you can do a lot with very minimal currency in the first couple days of a league, few days of a league, just because there is such a demand, yet the supply is so low. That you come into a point where the inflation is massive. Not the inflation of the price, but it's kind of the opposite. It's the inflation of what your currency is actually worth. Dropping a chaos orb in the first few hours of a league is worth immensely more than dropping a chaos orb 4 days into a league, and that's worth even more than dropping a chaos orb two months into a league, while that same Chaos Orb remains the exact same thing, one Chaos Orb. The thing is, the price of, say, an Exalt or a Mirror in the first, day of a league is much different than after 4 days, and that is immensely different, infinitely different than after 2 months. So you got to look at it in a way that you're not just looking at basically how much currency it is in terms of, say, Chaos or Exalts, but you really want to look at it more in terms of mirrors and fractions of mirrors. Because if something is 1/20th of a mirror in the first day and it remains 1/20th of a mirror after a week, you've essentially made no money, but you've lost no money. And what I mean by that is, let me just use a very, very, round numbers. You have something in the first day of a league worth an Exalt, and mirrors are 10 Exalt, and that's not real. I'm just using very round numbers. So you have something worth an Exalt, mirrors are worth 10 Exalts. So it's essentially your item's worth 1/10 of a mirror, right? But let's say after a week that item is now worth 10 Exalts, but mirrors are 100 Exalts. You're still looking at 1/10 of a mirror. While you may think, well, dude, I turned 1 Exalt into 10 Exalts. That's huge. Well, it's huge, but then when you look at it on a mirror scale, which is what you should be doing, because that's basically what all the currencies are decided by, is the actual value of mirrors and not Exalts, not Chaos Orbs. Despite what majority of people will try to make you think, it all comes down to actual mirrors. So 1/10 of a mirror will remain 1/10 of a mirror if mirrors are 10x and you got an X, and if mirrors are 100x and you have 10x. You're still essentially 90% away from the one mirror, or 10% towards the one mirror if you want to be optimistic about it. You're 10% of the way there in both scenarios, just that one makes you feel like you have more currency, 10x versus 1x, but in reality you don't. And obviously, like I said, I'm using numbers that are not at all like normal. Mirrors will never be 10x on the day one, and they'll never be 100x. Well, actually, they might be 100x after a week. But that's typically not really where they're sitting. They're more sitting around like 70x after the first week, and let's say day 2, they're more around the 30x mark. You'd be lucky to get it for one for cheaper than 30x. But still, 1/10 of a mirror is 1/10 of a mirror. So that's basically kind of what I wanted to tell you guys, is that if you apply all these principles that I'm giving to you guys in my videos, and also try really hard to make currency and push yourself, you'll come to realize that you really want to be looking at things in terms of values and fractions of mirrors, because that's what dictates markets. It's not, like I said, Chaos or Exalts, unlike what the majority of people would try to make you believe. It simply isn't. At least when you're in the ballpark of the big boys and actually making a lot of currency. So that's just one thing I wanted to get out of the way. So things like trying to flip unique items, buying really well rolled unique items. If you can get them for like very, very dirt cheap, let's say a Chaos, and flip them for an Exalt, that's a worthwhile investment. Because you're taking a single Chaos and turning it into an Exalt, and at any point in the league, that's a flip that would be considered good, no matter what. But for example, if that same unique, it's well rolled and it might be worth like 3 Exalts in your opinion, but it's listed for 1 Exalt, so you'd have to buy it for an Exalt to try to sell it for 3. Right? The issue now becomes a question of demand, and how much currency you have to actually sit on. Because if you only have that 1 Exalt, right, and you're thinking of buying this unique for an Exalt, because you know for a fact that it's worth 3 Exalts, and it just might well be worth it, just might well be worth 3 Exalts. The thing is, you're you're essentially putting all your eggs, your one exalt, in one basket, in one single item. And if the demand for that item isn't there, or for example, if the demand is there, but it just so happens that when somebody wanted to buy your item, you're just not online, so he buys it from someone else or something like that, essentially you're just kind of sitting on currency in terms of your actual, unique item that you're sitting on. You're still basically sitting on currency. The difference is you no longer have that freedom to take that one exalt and to try to turn it into more currency until that item, that unique or whatever that you bought for one exalt, sells for either 3 exalts, or maybe you have to undercut it. To undercut it to 2.5 or maybe even 2, and maybe it just isn't selling at all, and then the supply goes way up and you have to sell it for 1 exalt, which is what you paid for it, a few days ago, and that's really bad. So one of the better advice, one of the best advice I can give you guys is stay away from items unless it's a really, really, really good deal. Like I'm saying, something you can sell for an X and you buy it for a Chaos, something like that. Something that's an amazingly good deal that you won't really you won't really realize that currency, that 1 Chaos, for example, is missing. Yet when you sell the item, say for an Exalt, then you will realize that, hey, there's an extra Exalt in my stash. And those items, let's say you buy 100, 200, 300 of them, or whatever, for example, then you're only, in the hole for 200-300 Chaos. Let's say you bought 200-300 at 1 Chaos each. Yet, if they were to miraculously all sell, you'd be looking at 200-300x, right? So that's why I'm saying only go for it if it's an amazing deal and if you can afford to lose it. That's another thing, is basically you only ever want to go for it and go for things that you can afford to lose. If you can't afford to lose it, don't buy it. Essentially, it's kind of like gambling in a sense. So then what would be my recommendation in terms of trading to actually make currency? Well, would be to just flip the things that you know and that I know and I'm telling you are going to work. For example, what we've been looking at here for the past like 10 minutes, currency. Flip currency, flip maps, flip divination cards, flip sextants, flip scarabs, flip fossils, flip things that are in high demand in high volume. So things that there is a ton of, for example, let's just go to fossils. So let's just use jagged fossils. In Legion were really good, right? Because it was a melee league and physical damage was huge. So flipping, say, jagged fossils was massive if you could buy them one at a time and, say, sell them in bulk, or even just get a really huge inventory of them and then resell them a little bit later on for much more expensive in bulk. So things like that. Or if you want to be as safe as possible, just flip currency. I have a video on that was one of my first videos on this YouTube channel. And it's called, I think, Path of Exile Economy Class Comprehensive Flipping Guide or something like that. And I go over the exact way that I set up for flipping currency. I didn't do that in Legion just because I didn't feel like it, honestly. But it remains one of the better ways to make currency, because the reality is, as a real human being, as a real player, you're going to get more currency faster than all the bots. So all the trade bots is what I'm talking about. So you'll be able to, actually dive into this currency flipping because you'll have more supply. Therefore, you get to dictate, your profit margins until all the trade bots get their supply of currency. Then it's game over, and you'll basically never make currency from flipping currency anymore, unless you're either only flipping like very high tier currency, say like flipping exalts and flipping mirrors. Flipping mirrors is always going to be good currency. The only thing is it requires to have a lot of base currency. But if you're at that point, and you're flipping mirrors, you probably don't need to watch this video. So yeah, another very good thing that I can recommend at any point is DIV cards. And what I mean by that is not selling and buying DIV cards. It's buying DIV cards that are flavor of the month, that are good in the current meta, getting them for either market value or perhaps below market value, then making the item from those DIV cards and, you know, selling those items once they're completed. Because essentially what you're doing is you're buying fragments of that item in terms of DIV cards. So let's go with, like, in Legion League, you had a Azir's Disfavor or Starforge, right? You could buy 8 cards, I think it was, for Starforge at, say, 1 Exalt each. You know, so your money in would be 8 Exalts to get a Starforge, but then you could sell that Starforge for 10, 11x. Maybe you divide it a few times, you hit something really lucky, you get to sell it for 12x. So just by feeding the lazy people actual completed items, by you yourself buying fractured pieces of that item, and by that I mean DIV cards, you can make some very noticeable currency. And I know people who almost do only DIV card flipping at the beginning of the league, and they get extremely rich very fast. Because it is a very snowbally thing, you know. Once you're the first to a certain market, and you get to corner, and you get to dictate the price of certain things, because of your supply versus everybody else's supply, then market manipulation becomes very easy. And I also know people who don't even mess around with all of these and only do currency flipping in the first few days, because that's what they know best, and that's what's obviously the easiest thing to do, right? You just set up your margins, and then you let people come to you to buy them, all while you're mapping or doing other things or whatever it is. And it's essentially every single trade is profit, no matter if it's 1 chaos profit or 3 chaos profit, or even, you know, half a chaos profit. It's still free currency that you have to do nothing for it. You just have to accept the trade window and put some currency in it. So, you know, very easy. So that's honestly basically it in terms of the last video. And I've been thinking about it for a while, honestly, and I kind of wanted to give you guys the best advice possible. And then I was sitting there thinking of what can I do to make, you know, this video really pog. And then I realized there's not a whole lot to do. It just, the reality is markets are way too versatile and volatile early, so it becomes very hard to dial in on which ones are really worth it. And now I'm talking in terms of like rare items and like unique items and stuff like that. But if you go just the currency route, or the DIV card route, or the fossils route, or the fragments route, and all the and then perhaps you pair that up with, you know, some actual crafting. So say you're just flipping fossils, and then the fossils extra that you're making from flipping them, you're actually just using those to craft. Then you can make a whole lot of currency there as well, which goes back to the crafting video I made you know, a few weeks ago. So that's basically all I have to say in terms of trading. There's 2 bits of advice, essentially. The TLDR for the video, 2 bits of advice. Stay away from items and dive headfirst into currency and you know, fragments, DIV cards, all that good stuff. And that's how I would go about it for the first 4 days. And this is where I'm going back to what I said at the very beginning of the video. This applies to the first like 3-4 days, right? Afterwards, it's a different story. Afterwards, currency starts to be available a lot more. Chaos and starts to be worth a lot less, because exalts are, you know, going up in price, mirrors are going up in price, etc. So then you run into the situation where normally you should be starting to have like a lot of chaos, a lot of of currency, and once you reach that point, then you can go looking to items, looking to more crafting, and things that are a little bit, let's say, more risky. But the thing is, you can afford to lose a little bit along the way because you're gaining so much most of the time and then losing a fraction of the time. Yet, the problem with that mentality very early in the league is that you cannot afford to lose. If I told you that I'm going to give you 10 exalts in the first day of a league, right? I'm just outright telling you I'll give you 10x right now, first day of a league. And then I tell you, but you have to basically, almost gamble it. Or I'll give you, 5 exalts, but you get to keep them or do whatever you want with them, right? You'll probably just take the 5 exalts just because it's yours and you don't have to gamble it. It's safe and it's there to stay. While if I give you 10x, but then you're forced to gamble it, who knows, you might lose all of it. And that's the issue with the flipping items and stuff like that early, is that you're sitting on currency, and anytime you're sitting on currency, you're not making currency with that currency because it's tied into items and things like that. While if you just use that currency to generate more currency, say by like crafting for profit or just flipping currency straight up, then you could be making more, and maybe the margins are lower, but at least you're not sitting on it, and it's not tied into something that might never happen. For all I know, right? For all you know, you don't know. Like, you could think that something's a good deal, but then in reality, it just doesn't work out. It doesn't sell, and you end up really fucking yourself over. So only go for markets you know. Make sure you study properly using your tools available, such as like PoE Ninja or just like PoE Ninja, the builds section of the website, where you can see what's really meta, and I have a video on that as well. Otherwise, just stay away from it. If there's a potential for currency loss that early, just stay away from it because every little bit matters at that point, right? So that's basically all I have to say. Before leaving you, I want to say once again a huge thank you to my supporters, the Patreons, who are making this essentially possible and who will be making the stream possible very soon. So Kfish, Alex, Dante, ZzMastermind, Drool, Gorogothands, Val, Francesco, and Alex as well. Thank you guys all so very much, and you guys are pretty fucking awesome, and I wish you all the best in the upcoming Blight League. And that'll conclude this series, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.